Hey there. Welcome to the Feral Woman podcast. I'm Michaela Ray, your host and feral woman. I will go into what I mean by that probably at some point. But today I just wanted to say hello again. This is tagged on to the end of my last podcast, which were in 2020. So you can go back and check those out, but you can just jump in with me now. I'm a little more dangerous as I'm a licensed professional counselor now, and I have a little more, well, a lot more knowledge behind me now and a lot more experience, a lot more exposure to, what people are going through. So we'll be tapping into a little bit of that and really figuring out how to get through this existence, right? So just a little intro on me. Like I said, am a licensed therapist. I practice in Texas. Yeah, Texas. And I specialize in borderline personality, divorce, and low self esteem. So I really love helping people find their authentic self and building on that. And it's a rough journey, but once you get there, it's totally worth it. So essentially, another important piece here is that I am politically progressive. I am a blue dot in a red state, so I will be bringing some of that stuff up. If that's going to bother you, if you're open minded to hearing what I have to say, great. If not, totally understand. I'm also spiritual, but not religious. I grew up in some religion and not necessarily through my parents, but myself. I've been a seeker since I was little. I would toddle myself out to this. Well, I wasn't that young, but I was pretty young. I was about this high. Get myself out to the church bus, and my parents didn't know where the church was really. They knew where ish, but we lived way out in the country. Um, and I was just curious. I always knew I would take myself to the Sunday school there and then get myself home back on the bus. And I always believed that there was something greater than us. I started to question that later in life when the judgment piece really impacted my relationship with God and the congregation. I was deep in the church. I was there 3 nights a week. I was in the, volunteering in the nursery and the kids section and all sorts of stuff. So I am familiar with and support religion if it serves you, but I will be tapping on things that might stretch the minds of someone who has really just leaned on religion for informing them of what's beyond us, right? So we'll definitely be touching on that. And I am a feminist. That's the long and short of it. And I've become more so as we've progressed. I still love men, but I believe we got kind of a sour batch. I'm not saying there aren't good men out there, but there's programming that's occurred for both men and women, and so we're kind of operating subconsciously at a level that doesn't serve us, men or women. And the women are pushing back. And, you know, there are, like I said, there's definitely good men out there, but there's also a lot who are refusing to consider that they might need to evolve a bit. So I'll also be touching on those things. I welcome men to listen. As a therapist, considered not seeing men anymore as clients, but I honestly keep them around because they are great men. So they remind me that they're out there. So, I'm not moving into the man hater space, but there's definitely some frustration there. And I do believe that there's a churning of discord between the masculine and feminine, particularly here in the US. So I think it needs to be addressed. And people with open minds can listen to both sides. And, I know that the guys have a side too. I know that there's women out there that aren't all, very high quality. And I try to say that without judgment, but then there's also shitty people. I mean, let's be real. So we've all had our heart broken. We're all kind of getting stepped on a little bit, but essentially my intention is not to vent as much as discuss and share the feminine perspective from, well, my feminine perspective. It's not I'm not. So yeah, that'll be in there too. And the other big theme is what I call mindfulness as an extreme sport. We have to be able to manage what we're going through. And we as a country have been arrogant in thinking that we're exempt from these things, but here we are. And the collateral damage, if you're not directly impacted, which I've worked with people who are and have been, and it's terrifying for them. And I firmly believe that those of us that have privilege need to use it in a way that supports anyone who is being oppressed in any way that we can. So we'll be touching on that as well. But back to the mindfulness piece of it, we need to be able to shore up ourselves so that we can manage the increasing impact on us at whatever level we're exposed, because it's increasing for all of us. Like even my clients that, they're just, their anxiety levels have gone up just in general, as has mine. I'm like grinding my teeth now and or clenching my teeth now all the time, and that's new for me now. It's been, I'm sure, I think it's been there in the past, but I'm really feeling that. And honestly, another thing I'll talk a lot about is medication, and I'm very open about my own journey. So I've had to increase my own antidepressant and access the norepinephrine in addition to the serotonin piece of that medication journey to manage my own anger, my own like short fuse, just being out with people, being out driving, just trying to get to Pilates, whatever. I feel the need to correct everybody for stupid shit, right? It's stuff that doesn't, now that I've managed that with some medication, it doesn't even come up really in my, I'm not registering it as intense. Now in driving, I mean, that significantly has gotten better where I can kind of hang back and let people be dumb. I still am so irritated. Don't drive in the left lane if you're going slow, guys. If there's people behind you, move. You should not be sitting in the left lane, period. And I think my previous podcast, I talk a lot about traffic, but now I deal with it a little bit less, but still, anyway, I digress. So, in order to manage all of that, we have to manage our minds. We have to manage our own triggers. Our triggers aren't something that we are supposed to vomit on other people or expect other people to manage for us. We have to fall on our own grenade in that way. So, I will touch on things that help us do just that. And we also have to shore up ourselves so that we're available to those that we love and want to serve, right? A little more background. I am an Air Force veteran. I served for 8 years. I was an aircraft mechanic on the F-15 and then the C-5. I loved being a mechanic. I loved my airplanes. The Air Force, not so much. I was one of 3 females out of 300 guys. So it was intense. It was a lot. And I dealt with a lot of microaggressions and some other things that it was interesting. I went to the emergency room recently. I'm fine now, and maybe I'll get into that at some point. But the doctor came in, and I think he was trying to distract me a bit. And he was like, "So, tell me about your time in the military." And he said, when I told him what I did, he's like, "Well, you have to have some good stories." And I was trying to think about them, and of course, your mind goes blank in that moment. But most of the ones that I came up with were some kind of harassment, or I can't believe this happened, or this really stuck with me because it was a bit maybe traumatic with a little t. Although I've been in Japan in charge of an aircraft, and not being listened to or not being respected in the role as crew chief, that's a lot. You're in charge of getting this aircraft off the ground. You got people in Japan that want to come back to the US and they're waiting on you and the cargo, all that stuff. And so, it's just that kind of pressure might be trauma. So anyways, this is what would what would constitute CPTSD, complex PTSD, where it's like drops of little T trauma all the time, or you feel trapped in a way. Like, of course, I was in the military, so I couldn't leave. Um, and being trained the way that I was going to be with guys anyways. And that's the kind of work I wanted to do. And I was good at it, you know? But anyway, I have experience with what a lot of women continue to deal with today. I have extensive experience, not just with men, but with women. I always say men will bitch and moan, but women will get you fired. And I have the kind of personality that's ticked off a few clicky type mean girls, right? And I'll tell that story sometime, I'm sure. But the way that we're all interacting with each other is shifting. And so we also need to be aware of and help facilitate that. Essentially, the most conscious person in the room is responsible for a lot of this. So we'll talk more about that. And unfortunately, when you start to wake up to this stuff, you can't go back to sleep. So sorry, sorry, not sorry. It's I believe the evolution of the species. So here we go. Anyway, but essentially, I'll read you a little summary here. This is going to be chats about surviving humanity, whether that be your own humanity or dealing with the humanity of others. We're in weird times where self care is vital to sustain our own journey. And in that vein, the topics that are going to be covered are honoring ourselves, living authentically, and managing our fears. So, for this intro podcast, I believe the number one thing to talk about here is honoring ourselves. So, I'll go into that a bit. I don't want to make this, a forever long thing, but I'll try to rein it in. I'll try to be efficient and succinct. Okay, so in honoring ourselves, we need to first understand the importance. In honoring ourselves, first let's talk about the importance, and you'll understand more of what I mean by honoring ourselves the more I talk about it. Okay, so just stay with me here. First is the sustainability of ourselves. If we're not making choices that honor ourselves, that means oftentimes we're not taking care of ourselves. Early in session, I'm asking things like, give me 2 of your needs, give me 2 of your preferences. And I can't tell you how many, particularly women, but also men, have no idea. They have never thought, and I'm talking about people in their 40s. If I've got someone in their 20s that doesn't know their preferences, okay, you'll get some as you go along. And these people have preferences, but they've never thought about it or even can identify really what their needs are. And these are important things. This life is a bus we're driving here. And if we don't put in an order of where we want to go, we're just kind of inflicted upon by life rather than being a co-creator with life where we put in our thoughts, our prayers, all of that. It's energy that you're putting out there. And we want to think about the things that we want, right? Not what we don't want. But going back to driving this bus, we want to have a say, and it requires that awareness. And the awareness comes from, starts with, what do I need? And for instance, what I need is nature. I need my animals. I need freedom. My top 2 values are independence and freedom. Somebody who really highly values family, that'll be different for them. Their preferences or their values list different, and they may not even have independence or freedom. But these are things that I've had to learn. I prefer not to have a boss. I prefer to work from home. I prefer to sleep at 66 for it to be 66 degrees at night. That's often the example I give. So, I've put in an order, and I did this 10 years ago. I'll talk about that later, to essentially create what I have now. And it's getting better as I go. And there's so many times that I hear people just end up where they're at because they didn't think about it and they didn't put it in order. It's essential that we learn who we are and cultivate that order and speak on it in some capacity. So knowing what we need and want helps us create an existence that is making us fortify. It's fortifying us. It's fulfilling us. So we are more able to give. particularly in this time, I have to be very careful. If I'm not eating well, not sleeping well, not taking care of myself, there's so much space I'm holding right now that is a lot of I really don't know what to tell you because of what's going on in our nation. And that's hard, right? There's plenty of energy given in just the work alone, but then you add on this sense of helplessness, and it's a lot of mourning is what it is. So I have to be ready for, I have to be able to hold that. And now I try not to carry it with me, but that also requires a lot of self-care. I got to get it out. This is energy that's got to move. So I've created a situation where I have practices that allow me to show up for others. And if those practices fall off, then you become more and more of a husk of yourself, right? And so then you don't have the capacity to serve in a way that you want to or need to, you know? Okay. So another way that honoring ourselves is important is essentially, we are, now I will reference scripture a lot. I believe that there's lots of good in there. Okay. So essentially we're instructed to love our neighbors. But what's the first part of that? Or was it the second part? Love our neighbors. Yeah. Second part. Love our neighbors as what? As we love ourselves. So we're literally commanded in that tradition, and all of them, I think it's a Christ consciousness thing, to love ourselves. And that falls into line with my understanding of things as well, because I do believe that we all have divinity within us, that we are all a piece of God having a human experience. So in that way, when we dishonor ourselves, guess what? It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And it has an impact, which we'll talk about here in a second. Loving ourselves seems like a very ethereal, ephemeral concept, much like honoring ourselves. It's the same. To me, it's the same thing. And I'll go into, something tangible we can do. But first we need to understand, in order to be able to be with others, we have to be able to be with ourselves. In order to love others, we have to be able to love ourselves. If I squeeze you, what am I going to get? And this is a reference to Ram Dass, Richard Alpert. I'll bring him up a lot too. And if you're an angry person, if I squeeze you, I'm going to get anger. And not saying that there isn't a lot of anger that's justified right now. We will also be flipping tables here on this podcast. But it also starts, it absolutely starts with how we feel about ourselves. And everybody is a mirror of that. If I've got a client that's going on about someone being selfish, I can probably figure out, maybe even if he or she is not telling me, that they're probably behaving in selfish manners in their own life. We don't really have the vocabulary, even if it's not within us. Like it doesn't, I have this thing about lying almost, where and I think it's from trauma, where I was accused of things I never did or said or whatever. And so I try to give all the details so that I can, it's a trauma thing. It's a dysfunctional thing to some degree, but I'm working on it. So it doesn't occur to me really that other people are lying to me. And similarly, as we evolve, as we learn what we're going to learn here, hopefully together and in life, we assume that other people grow with us, and they don't. So there's also grief in this journey, right? And we'll get more into that later. Trying not to get sidetracked here. But essentially, the whole game starts with learning to love ourselves. That is the whole game. That is what we're here to do. And you learn to do that, and it starts emanating from you, and it just becomes your natural behavior. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not, like, I'll still, there's a meme that I just recently saw that says, I may be laid back, but I will lean forward real quick. And absolutely. And I am made to flip tables. So I'm not saying that we are weak or submissive. It's understanding that honoring ourselves has boundaries. And upsetting other people is okay. Of course, if we're trying, honestly, if we're honoring ourselves from a Christ consciousness, love perspective, hopefully it's benefiting everybody around us, even if that looks like some destruction or hurting their feelings by giving feedback. I always say I'm kind, but I'm not always nice. I'm You can bet on me to be kind, but you may not. It may not be what's considered nice. An example I give, and this is of course a mild example, is I tell people when they have something in their teeth. It's uncomfortable for everybody involved, but I would hate for you to go home and look in the mirror and you got something in your teeth and you're like, why didn't she tell me? Uh, no. And similarly, if you've got beef with someone, you need to go tell them so that they have the opportunity to correct it. It sucks when that doesn't happen and then someone blows up on you and you're like, I didn't even know about that. It's not honoring the relationship to not be transparent about those things. So, loving ourselves, everything stems from that. And everything when we don't love ourselves, the same thing happens. So we'll talk about that. And another important piece is that choices we make that don't honor ourselves end up biting us. You can bet on that too. If we choose to, somebody, we're at work, for example, and someone comes up to us and they're a chatty Cathy and they're going on about their whatever, and you've got shit to do. If you are nice and stand there and listen and don't say anything, and then you end up resentful of this person, and then you also are late on whatever work it was that you had to do, and now you can't make this dinner or what, it just trickles on from there. Ultimately, by choosing to stand there and listen instead of saying, hey, I'm so sorry, maybe we could talk about this later, but I've got stuff to do, and move on. If you don't do that, you are, and of course this is a heavy word, but you're betraying yourself in that moment. So learning to make these choices also involves a lot of boundary setting, also very uncomfortable. A lot of honoring ourselves will be uncomfortable, particularly in the initial stages, because people have constructs of how you behave and who you are, and they have a particular one that serves them best. It's probably not close to who you are. And when you push on that, they know the boundaries now that they have had with you. So when you go try to move those, you're going to get feedback, but that's okay. We'll talk more about that. Okay. So the last piece here regarding importance is that honoring ourselves is the only way to live authentically. And it is my firm belief that authentic living is in alignment with Christ consciousness. And it doesn't mean bowling over everybody to get whatever you want. This, again, the honoring ourselves piece is also aligned with love and Christ consciousness. So we're creating from a benevolent space. That's the assumption here. And when you get clear on what you need and how you can activate and access your best self, kind of hate using that because that's kind of kitschy, but you have to be aware of your limitations, your needs, and all that, then do the work to start to create these situations for yourself. And the more you do that, the deeper you access who you really are. And again, a bit painful in that we tend to lose some folks when we access who we really are. But I'll tell you, it's an addicting or addictive, I always get those confused, behavior. Same thing once you access some peace. I am addicted to my peace. And I always say, if you're going to be selfish with anything, be selfish with your peace. So all of this that goes into learning to honor ourselves will make you and the people around you uncomfortable initially. And then hopefully things fall into a better place for you. So all of these four things: the sustainability of ourselves, learning to love ourselves, learning to make choices that aren't going to bite us, and learning to live authentically are all how we honor ourselves. Those are all very ephemeral, ethereal. I can't remember which is more appropriate there. But I have something that we can look at that is in alignment with all the things that we just talked about, but it's a bit more tangible. It's not all that tangible, but a little more to hang on to here. So what I'm referencing is making choices that honor ourselves. And that can look like a number of different things. It may look like we're assessing relationships that maybe they trigger us, maybe they aren't working for us anymore for whatever reason. Or we are looking at tasks that we do every day. If I need to clean every Saturday, if even though that's how I grew up cleaning or what I grew up doing, that when I'm working two jobs and in university full time and raising a kid alone and maintaining a house that I own and nobody ever comes over, that I don't need to have a floor so clean that you can eat off of it, particularly with, I think I had 3 dogs at the time. So I let it go a bit. But there was a time, I mean, that was a journey because I would get really stressed out. Like my week couldn't be a week or the week was shit because whatever, it just ridiculous stuff. So now I clean when I clean, and I did yesterday, and it feels great, of course, but it's not always honoring myself to clean. Sometimes it is honoring myself to clean. So when we're looking at this, sometimes it's honoring ourselves to do the thing. Sometimes it's honoring ourselves to sit down and binge, well, now South Park, right? I don't know. I haven't watched the old stuff, but I do have an interesting tidbit about South Park that I'll have to share sometime. But anyway, I would have you look at your standards. If you feel an external obligation to do something, it needs to be questioned. It needs to be something that you are actively choosing to do. It's not always pleasant, but it's something honoring ourselves. Exercising, great example. Eating well, great example. These are things that aren't necessarily pleasant, but the effects are not only pleasant, they are honoring ourselves, this vehicle that we are supposed to maintain until it's no more, and we have no idea how long that is. So things like not having good oral health is a betrayal of ourselves, and I know that that's a touchy subject, especially for depression people, and I've been there. I know it's hard, and the impact, however, is a big one. So we have to understand the role that these things play in our life and whether they serve us or do not. And like I said, more grief comes with that, but initially, but over time, you create a situation where you can be the best version of yourself and you can access a different way of existing. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too long, and it was a little choppy, but first time out the gate in 5 years, we'll take it. I hope you enjoy. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you have anything you want me to talk about as we go along, please let me know. This is a different format than I have been in therapy for 5 years, so with clients. So, I mean, the shit that comes out in therapy is freaking awesome, but you guys can't access that, and you get a different version of me when it's just me talking here. So I do love questions. I do love some conversation about what I'm talking about, or again, if there's a topic that you would like to discuss, please let me know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all those good things, and I will see you next time.